Namaste, everyone. A very warm welcome to you on behalf of Climate and Sustainability Initiative. My name is Junisha Kaul, and I am the Media and Communication Specialist here. CSI is an international organization headquartered in Singapore, committed to accelerating the net zero transition in emerging economies, working at the intersection of climate finance, policy, technology, and decarbonization across the sectors of power, transport, industrial, and financial sectors. Today, we are delighted to host the webinar on the crucial topic of green manufacturing for a net zero India, industrial policy in the decarbonization decade. We are privileged to be joined by a stellar panel of speakers who bring perspectives from finance, policy, industry, banking, and academia. Let me quickly and briefly introduce them to you. We have Mr. Alexander Hogeveen Rutter, Manager Research and Diligence, Electricity Sector Lead at Third Derivative. He has deep expertise in industrial decarbonization and climate tech innovation. We have Mr. Pratyush Mehrotra, Deputy General Manager, ESG and Climate Finance Unit at State Bank of India, leading India's largest bank's net zero and sustainable finance strategy. We have Mr. Akshay Gupta, Managing Partner at Econ Climate Fund, who has over 2 decades of experience in clean energy and infrastructure investing. We have Ms. Bharti Krishnan joining us as co-founder of Fine Train, who specializes in financing for climate startups and SMEs. Then we have Mr. Dr. Vikram Vishal, professor at IIT Bombay, a leading expert on CCUS and clean energy technologies. Mr. Hisham Mandal, Chief Advisor, India at Environmental Defense Fund, with over 25 years of leadership experience across climate and development sectors. To further amplify this discussion, we'll be recording the session. The participants are requested to send in their questions in the Q&A box, along with the name of the panel they wish to ask. We will address these towards the end of the discussion. With this distinguished panel, I now hand over to Mr. Labanya Prakash Jeena, Director at CSI, who will be moderating today's discussion.
Thanks, Junisha, and thanks everyone, particularly the speakers who have taken some time and want to share their insights and experience on clean technologies here in India. So we are going through some turbulent time now, both political and economically, and we can see that politicians are busy in fighting wars or dodging our wars, as well as busy in negotiating on trade. And some politicians are also trying to win elections. And so politicians are flaunting their military muscles. Okay, so it's a very difficult time for all of us. But what we can see in India, it's very different because India's commitment, particularly political willingness to climate actions, has not changed compared to many other countries in the West, excluding, I will say, China. So all other countries have withdrawn. And recently, India has crossed 50% of energy capacity addition. I think it crossed in June 2025 or so, which is a very, very encouraging sign. India has not changed its stance on climate change, which is a very good news, particularly for Global South. But one issue India is facing regarding the manufacturing of clean tech. So as we know that as we progress to a net zero scenario, so it is very difficult for a large economy like India to rely on supply chain. And there is a possibility that India could be vulnerable to net zero journey as well, particularly if we are relying on unreliable partners. So that's the reason there is a slogan, as we know, that Atmanirbhar Bharat also, we need to be independent. I can understand that since we are operating in an integrated global economy, we cannot be 100% independent, but at the same time, we can do whatever we can do the best. As we know that the government of India is putting a lot of thrust, and there is an upcoming industrial policy and national mission on climate manufacturing. I think it is timely in nature. I believe that we need to push on several fronts, both on the policy fronts as well as investing in research and R&D, and we need to have a concrete plan to really achieve net zero. At the same time, keep our country not so vulnerable to global supply chain and green technologies. So we have a stellar panelists coming from not-for-profit societies, from technology field, from banking, finance, and academics. I'm hoping that we'll get some insights. And what we are trying to do is to create some kind of white paper based on the discussion, and we'll circulate that thereafter. So I'll start with Dr. Vishal, since you have a session to join. You have spent, I think, your entire academic career on clean technologies, and you are an entrepreneur as well. So what are the most promising technologies which can redefine India's green manufacturing system in the next 1 or 2 decades? Over to you, Dr. Vishal.
Yes, thank you for having me on this panel, and indeed a delight to be among other eminent speakers out here. So definitely India's story is different from much of, I would say, rest of the world, where the initiative on decarbonization started way earlier. However, as you rightly said, we are catching up well, rather with this whole renewable story, success story, and leading to more than 50% of the energy coming from them. We have made quite in advance the commitments what was for the Paris as per the Paris Agreement. So in that respect, we are doing very well. However, if you look at the scale at which we are growing, it needs a lot more energy, and clearly. And even though we have renewables above 50 now, or so to say non-fossil fuel more than 50, coal usage is on the rise. So last year we produced 1 billion ton of coal, and which is on an average 10 to 14% rise that's happening over the last few years. So cumulatively, the emissions are growing. We are also growing in emissions from from last year was about 2.7. This year, the financial year ends, it was 2.9 billion tons of emissions. So collectively, around another 10-12% emission is on the rise. So definitely, we need to look at the suite of technologies where we need to push down the carbon dioxide emissions into the atmosphere. So definitely, electrification of the grid with the clean energy is an important vertical. Solar is an important vertical. Hydrogen is being talked about quite a lot, and the government has ambitious plans to integrate roughly 5 million tons by 2030, which is also quite ambitious. Improving the energy efficiencies, or the efficiency of the processes will also be an important element in terms of decarbonization. Digitalization and digitization, both aspects need to be included in different processes, leading to overall cutting down of the emissions. And then we are left with the inevitable or residual emissions, which need to be tackled by using carbon dioxide capture, utilization, storage, without which we do not really see the pathway to net zero. There are other routes also, which are biologically inspired routes, which are also quite sustainable, so to say. There are challenges in scale up and the supply chain for some of these technologies. That will also be very, very crucial in all these aspects. So in the entire sort of climate justice, when we are doing this transition, energy transition, we need to look at just transition, but at the same time be very, very responsible in terms of our cumulative emissions. Decarbonizing supply chain is very, very important. I see. In fact, I'm aware of some of the leading manufacturing companies in the world who have cut down on emissions by using renewable energy largely at the manufacturing units. For them, the scope 1 emissions have been cut down significantly. But we know that the major amount of emissions is actually from the scope 2 and rather scope 3 emissions. So how do we collectively account for all of these? Measurement, reporting, verification is an important vertical. We need to have these ways to quantify them. And then once we have quantified, how we monitor them, and eventually, verify and report them accurately is an important element. So all in all, there are different aspects that we need to look into. India is pushing a lot on the renewables, as you know, on the solar, on the EVs and the hydrogen parts of it. But I think some other aspects also coming up in the CCS and CDR space. So I'll take a pause for now.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Vishal. I'll come back to Alex. You spend time in energy companies, you spend time at IFC and engaged in investing in green technologies, and spend time at ISA as well, and now at Third Derivative. I can understand that you have been associated with several startups who are engaged in green manufacturing. And at the same time, you understand that technologies, particularly green technologies, many of them are at a stage. It is not scalable yet, and these startups need to wait for a long time to commercialize these technologies. So based on your experience, what are the challenges they are confronting? Financing, ecosystem, there is an absence in policies. What do you think, Alex?
Yeah, I think there's firstly, thank you so much for the invitation. And yeah, as I said, at Third Derivative, we work with a lot of innovative startups. So I just want to reassure people this is happening. We are seeing a lot of exciting companies doing kind of this deep tech and manufacturing here in India. For sure, lack of capital, especially venture capital. and grant capital is a big gap in India. Hopefully we'll see this ANRF. Hopefully we'll start to see some funding for serious deep tech research. But to date, there hasn't been a lot. But I think this has also been an opportunity. I think we've seen companies do a lot of really frugal innovation here. You know, a good example of this is a company called Green working on CCUS that we just took on. Another one called Green Jams working on low carbon cement. And you know, these folks have innovated in such a way that there is very minimal green premium. You know, in some cases, they're actually cheaper than the alternative. In the case of this, you know, cement for Green Gems, for example. Green Pod Labs, another one that's manufacturing these sachets for agricultural, basically to preserve agricultural products so they don't waste. You know, food waste is a major source of emissions in India. My point is that a lot of these solutions are economic from day one. We're finding ways to get revenue from customers. They're finding ways to get by on these, you know, tiny 25, 50 lakh grants from the government. They're finding ways to kind of you know, combine grants and customer revenue and venture debt. I always like to say, people, you know what, don't be afraid to take venture debt at 16, 18%. There are venture debt providers. Maybe your business model, you know, works at 14%, but if you need to take that venture debt at 16 to 18%, take it and get that product, get that pilot, show that it can be done. And then once you've shown it can be done, then you can go back and negotiate for lower rates for future projects. We have actually seen, you know, a lack of off-takers. You know, the big companies in India, you know, the big conglomerates tend to be very risk averse in terms of supporting and working with Indian pilots. But we have seen kind of two bright spots. One is PSUs. You know, I think of like OSIS working with IOCL, or you look at dielectric vanadium redox flow working with you know, NTPC. So you actually see some of the PSUs being a little bit more open to innovation. The second one I think is the medium-sized family offices. So we just brought in this company, for example, called RenCube, that's manufacturing what they call optical trackers. So it's basically a way to get much higher output from solar, particularly in the evening and daytime, without the mechanical parts of a mechanical tracker. And you know the Waris and the Adanis, you know, they want to take a big stake. They want to say, no, we're going to buy you out. Whereas they've got a partner called Swilect, which has said, yeah, we'll work with you, we'll partner with you, we'll find ways to co-invest and be a partner and, you know, take a board chair and take a minority stake. So obviously you have to knock on a lot more doors, and it's a bit harder to work with as opposed to say US, where you kind of got these really big champions working with startups. But I think you know, we've seen a number of kind of small to medium-sized family offices willing to work with startups, willing to support innovation, willing to do pilots, willing to take minority stakes, willing to be, you know, advisors. And I think that's a really key opportunity for startups to kind of overcome this lack of interest from the big conglomerates.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. I'll come back to you since you spoke about what is happening in the United States, where big companies are also engaged in clean technologies. I'm coming to Mr. Pratyush. Like Alex said that this technology, they are also raising venture debt. He spoke about there is a lot of interest from high net worth individuals as well. So it means that most of these technologies are really risky and at a very early stage. And many of them are not bankable. But at the same time, since government is trying to transition the economy to a green sector and with a focus on clean tech manufacturing, so how a public sector bank like SBI understand that banks are prudential in their lending, but still play a critical role in this transition? So how as a public sector bank like SBI is playing in this clean tech manufacturing space? Over to you, Mr. Pratyush.
Thank you, Mr. Jina, for the question. As the largest bank of India, SBI is cognizant that manufacturing will be the mainstay of our country's to net zero journey. And manufacturing not only drives India's economic growth, but it also contributes significantly to the emission. And therefore, it is offering both the opportunity and the risk. So as a banker, I will agree that clean technologies often carry higher upfront costs, longer payback period, and technology risk in early stages, which make them less bankable. And this is where the role of the banks come. Like the challenge is to bridge this gap between early stage risk and reaching to eventual commercial viability. We saw a similar trajectory in renewable energy sector also, in particularly solar and wind, which were once seen as high risk, but through policy support, concessional finance, and scaling up, they are now commercially viable sectors, and banks are very comfortable lending to these sectors. I think the same playbook with appropriate adoptions needs to be applied for new technologies such as green hydrogen, carbon capture, pumped hydro storage, and so many other sectors. Now, as far as the role of public sector banks is concerned, now I think most of the banks, including State Bank of India, are aware of the country's aspirations, the targets, the Panchamrit goals. Most of the banks, we have our own commitments as far as all this 1, 2, 3 emissions are concerned. And as far as supporting the new age sectors and the clean technologies are concerned, one of the main things which in particular State Bank of India is doing, that we are adopting the blended finance model, where we are increasingly partnering with multilateral agencies, the DFIs like the World Bank, ADBs, EIB, KFW, to raise concessional capital and partial guarantees. This significantly helps us de-risk these large new age technology projects and make them more viable for financing. One more thing which most of the public sector banks are doing is on the capacity building front. I think most of the banks are now setting up dedicated sustainability or ESG desks. They are collaborating with the international climate funds, partnering with them, seeking the global case studies, the success studies that are happening across the world. One more thing which all the banks have adopted is the long-term perspective. Earlier, the banks were not comfortable financing to long-term projects, but now we are financing for projects up to 20 years also. Some of the key initiatives which the public sector banks have adopted so that the pace is not slowed down in the manufacturing sector is largely on the regulatory side also, with the Reserve Bank of India coming out with a green deposit framework and the Department of Economic Affairs coming with a sustainability and green bond framework. Now we have sources which can be deployed only in the green sector, which is mandatory as far as the reporting is concerned. Most of the banks are also coming with SME-focused schemes. I can tell about State Bank of India, especially for the energy efficiency and the renewable energy sector. There are specific schemes to promote energy efficiency among the SME also. We have a dedicated cell, we have a dedicated product. So many things are happening. We are also integrating ESG into our risk rating model. So all the ESG criteria in all the 3 areas, E, S, and G, is being we are analyzing and we are rating the borrowers on the ESG criteria also. Now, it's some important steps which at least State Bank of India has taken to support these sectors is that we have got an industry research department also, where we conduct in-depth study of all these new sectors. We identify the sector, the risk, and we adopt the mitigation strategies also. Apart from that, we have got a project finance unit also, where we are hiring sector experts also for all RE, power, infra, transportation, and all. These are sectoral experts who are experts in their fields and they guide us in the various areas. One more key initiative that I would like to highlight as far as State Bank of India is concerned is the creation of Center of Excellence. I think State Bank of India is first of its kind, which has decided to create a Center of Excellence for the key sunrise manufacturing sectors. Right now, we are focusing on 8 sectors, that is the renewable energy, advanced cell chemistry, data centers, e-mobility and charging infrastructure, semiconductors, green hydrogen, smart infrastructure, and decarbonization technologies. So this Center of Excellence, through the Center of Excellence, what we are doing, we are engaging with government department, meeting them, understanding the priority of the government, their vision in these sectors. We also propose to guide the government in formulating the policies for these sectors. And frankly speaking, we want to be the industry leaders in these sectors. So these are so many things which all the public sectors are largely focusing, and mainly is on the capacity building side. I think most of the banks are aware, they are having their own targets, which are being closely monitored. So this is from me as of now.
Thanks, Mr. Pratyush. So good to know that India's largest public sector bank, or largest bank, I will say, not public sector bank, is taking so many initiatives. I'll come back to you, Akshay. I mean, we have spoken many times, actually, the kinds of capital required for green technology, although you have not specifically mentioned green manufacturing, okay? Because for the last 10, 15 years here in India, mostly we are talking about how to deploy the capital instead of how to manufacture the technologies. So from a private equities perspective, we have spent more than a decade in infrastructure finance. In green finance, I think close to 10 years or so. So what are the kind of opportunities you are looking at, and where you are comfortable in providing capital, which kind of technologies, at what stages?
Sure, thank you. So from a private equity growth stage perspective, any sector where the revenue or the offtake related business model is relatively established, that is where private equity funds like ours can come in. Private equity's risk appetite is definitely higher than, say, banks, but it's also lower than venture capital funds or investors in early stage businesses. And while early stage businesses or clean tech startups are very important, and the innovation they bring is crucial to meet the net zero goals, it is also important to understand that, as I think McKinsey said in one of the reports, that to meet our net zero targets, more than 80% of the target can be met just by scaling up proven business models and proven technologies. And that scale up happens by bringing in larger amount of capital than today's system is able to provide in the form of grants or venture capital funds. And that large scale capital is brought in by private equity players. So because we have lower risk appetite than early stage or VC funds, only proven business models with proven technologies. And for green manufacturing, fortunately, in India today, we have quite a few opportunities. And they are because not just Indian government, both at center and state, have worked together to give predictability in terms of regulatory and policy frameworks, but also because India's size, domestic market is large enough to incentivize some of the manufacturers to take their bets in setting up facilities in India. So, for example, the lowest hanging fruit is, of course, the renewable energy value chain, which is driven in large part by solar power. So, for example, in terms of latest opportunities that we are looking at, it is not just solar modules, but going beyond to solar cells, which is driven not just by, as I said, the government mandate of local manufacturing content and import duties, but also by the fact that solar power is more economical than other sources of power. And within the mobility sector, within that, the electric vehicle sector, it's not just OEMs or EV manufacturers and the auto component manufacturers, but we are seeing a manufacturing opportunity in the enablers of the EV ecosystem. For example, EV charging manufacturers, including manufacturers who make battery swapping stations at a cost which is lower than what we saw a few years back, enabling battery swapping as a viable business model. And that unlocks many different kind of users of EVs than would have otherwise been possible. Similarly, we are looking at the battery value chain, not just across EVs, but for energy storage for grids. There, we're not just doing the battery assembly, but moving beyond to cell manufacturers. In fact, we're talking to a company that is starting precursor manufacturing that will go into cathode tubes that are an input for battery cells. So that is the level of indigenization which we are seeing. And of course, there's an element of biofuel manufacturing, which is driven by both biogas and ethanol mandates of the government. So these are some of the main businesses that which we are seeing. And there are a host of different funds which cater to different sub-segments within growth, both early growth, which is after the scaling and pilot is there, to late stage, which is just before a company goes for an IPO.
Okay, good to know that private equity investors, they are finding investment opportunity across the stages, which I didn't realize that. So it's good to know. It means that the clean tech manufacturing will not be restricted to private equities or high-risk investors, maybe in a few years, maybe bankers or institutional investors, they will also put in their capital. So I'll come back to you, Bharti. I mean, since you have been in the green financing space for some time, we know that MSMEs, because MSME is contributing close to 25-26% of GHG emission, they always struggle to raise capital. 90% of their loan applications get rejected actually if they apply to commercial banks or NBFC. So how effective to unlock financing, particularly if MSMEs are tried to be a part of this clean tech manufacturing? Over to you, Bharti.
Yeah, so yeah, you're right. MSME contribute to a lot of emissions, and they are, it's hard for them to be able to get bank funding. But I don't know if new schemes have to be done. I think there are some. For example, like today, if you are an exporter and you have input GST, right? You pay GST on your inputs, and when you go to export, you cannot settle that GST with the export credit. Now, for you to claim that your own GST from the government takes years. If you are a, let's say, a 10 crore company, a 10 crore startup, it doesn't even have to be MSME. You are a proper startup with some amount of early stage capital, and your turnover is, let's say, 5 crores or 7 crores. And even then, if your 2 crores is stuck in a GST over a period of 2-3 years, your working capital requirements have just shot up, and bank is not going to do anything about it. Similarly, if you look at credit guarantee schemes, right? Recently, the coverage is now 10 CR. Pratyush about it. Like if you go to any bank, they find it very hard to claim that from the government. Right. So if you go to so if you go to any, so while the schemes are there, intent is there, but I think the issue is in the implementation. Like most of the times, people are not able to get it because it just the system just doesn't work for whatever reason. The banks cannot claim it back from the government. If the person had to default, then that's a problem. Similarly, if you look at trade invoice financing, there also, I think the minimum turnover that your buyer should have is like 250 CR, and those buyers have to be rated. They have to be of good quality. It is harder for SMEs to onboard on those platforms. So I think these are more procedural issues than the scheme or then lack of financing mechanisms as such. And forget MSMEs. If you look at these startups, we have a lot of innovative companies in this. Right? If you look at waste to wealth or alternate material and all of that, a new class of VCs who call themselves deep tech. They don't say they are manufacturing, they fund manufacturing, they say IP-led manufacturing. But these VCs are willing to fund, and if today you were to raise, see, you have to be exceptional to be funded by VC. But if you are doing something that is going to scale significantly in next few years, and it's a novel technology, and you are looking to raise $1 million, it is possible today. It may not be great, but it is definitely much, much better. Like if you see Pi, Special Invest, Lavani, so many new VCs are getting launched, and many of them are talking about deep tech now. Excel has a like Akshay will know, Excel has a private equity $650 million fund for manufacturing. So definitely, because we are at a juncture in global environment is changing, and we are at a place where we cannot, as India as a country, we cannot just survive by doing low cost manufacturing. The focus is on IP-led manufacturing. So whoever is doing that, and if MSMEs start focusing on that, funding will come. I don't think funding is as such a problem. And also other thing is unit economics. See, we say that funding is not happening or whatever is not happening at a basic level. If you sell, like if you make operating margins or gross margins of at least 30-40%, or if you're going to make gross margins, if you're not making now, if you're going to make gross margin, then funding won't be a problem. But look at what happens. Look at our waste management businesses. They have to buy the waste. Right? If you have to buy, they are not paid processing fee unless you're doing wet waste. You are not paid a processing fee for taking care of a waste. It is such a big problem. If we were just paying them for processing the waste, then unit economics will be positive. And so that is, I think, as a consumer, it is up to us as consumer or society. I don't know if any schemes or anything else can solve it. But yeah, things are changing for the better. That's for true.
Thanks, Bharati. I'll come to you, Hisham, because EDF is working in multiple countries. on multiple corporations, large, small, with institutions, with governments very, very closely. And based on the experience and looking at global peers, so how does India's green industrial policy, now usually we call it industrial policy, but for last couple of years we are saying green industrial policy. I mean, India's ambition and implementation compared to other countries. So what is your experience? What are the lessons India can learn from other countries?
So thanks for having me, and thank you for everybody who's joined in. I want to start with a positive outlook because you described a fairly turbulent world, which is obviously the world that we live in. But one of the bright sparks on the world is actually in India as far as climate change is concerned. It is not a politically contentious issue. That is a great starting point. There is policy stability as far as the government is concerned on climate change. These seem like small things, but when you see what's happening in the rest of the world, you realize how lucky and blessed we are, and I really hope it stays for as long as it possibly can. The second defining feature in India is, while we've spoken about the green premium, the reality is that in an economy like India, you are beginning to see the green bonus from more sustainable businesses. And Indian industry has seen that. The cement sector, for example, is amongst the greenest in the world, whether they do it because they love the environment or whether they do it because they love their bottom line, it's fine. And you're seeing examples of that beyond cement as well. Big foods companies are doing some pretty fabulous work in terms of their supply chains. 1.5 million EVs sold last year. So both of those are really positive areas. In terms of how India contrasts with other countries, the pain points are where the real issue comes up. The first one is around investment in research. I think a couple of speakers have spoken about it before. As an economy, we spend about 0.7% of GDP on R&D, which contrasts to 1.6% for other industrial countries, 3% in the US. Of the amount that is spent in R&D, 40% in India is spent by the private sector. It's 70% in other industrial countries. So you need more R&D money and you need more private sector R&D money. And you're seeing the countries that are leading are the ones that are investing more. And so what implications that has for things like the industrial policy are you need, for example, more research-linked incentives, or the idea of an RLI the same way that you have a PLI. You have to look at PLIs and say, right now, the objective, as it should be, is how do I increase manufacturing output? How do I increase industrial output? How do I increase manufacturing jobs? Both of which are valid. But how do I create an incentive structure within that so that there is a bias towards the greener manufacturing options? That's where you see, in other geographies, a lot more proactive action. The third is, what is the access to finance that is there, the big ticket finance numbers? This isn't, the angel investing. I'm not for a moment discounting that. There is obviously a huge value for that. But where do companies get large sources of money? And in the European Union, for example, you have the Innovation Fund that companies can, the EU Innovation Fund companies can access. When China puts together, they didn't build their green economy by accident. They did it by concerted creation of manufacturing hubs and the right enabling policies that were put in place. The third example is to just let, and I think we're good that way, have an industrial policy that unleashes private sector innovation. What you've seen in Korea with their steel and their manufacturing companies, the good thing is that you're seeing it in India with the Reliances and the Adanis of the world. They are taking forward the green energy piece. The other contrast I would just make is the industrial policy and the greening of industry cannot be only about energy transition. Of course, there is a role for greener energy, and of course, there's a role for cleaner fuels. But don't underestimate the significant potential on industrial efficiency. And that is one which is different from India. And it's not as glamorous as, green hydrogen or some fancy new technologies out there, but there is so much emissions and commercial value that can be extracted in India through efficiency improvements. And some of it are not even in the factory. Freight and logistics, we spend 8 to 12% of our GDP on 10 to 12% of our GDP on freight and logistics. It's 6 to 8 in more industrial countries. That 4% is both a truckload of rupees and a truckload of emissions. Choose your motivator.
Thank you. Thanks, Shisham. I can understand that as a country in India, definitely I completely agree with you. We have not deviated from our climate ambition. We are still committed that we are a country which is very different from others. Good to know that you have echoed those sentiments. I'll come back to you, Dr. Vishal, that we understand that when we are talking about complete net zero, we cannot use the conventional technologies like energy or clean transportation. We need technologies which can remove carbon from the atmosphere as well and from the manufacturing plants. And I believe that your extensive research on CCUS and CDR will be definitely helpful. So I have one question on that. How these technologies can play in decarbonizing across the sector? And do you think that India is making enough progress on CCUS and CDR?
Yeah, thank you again. And I couldn't agree more with the previous speaker, Mr. Hisham Mandal, that R&D spend is very, very low in many of these technologies. And that's where if you want to grow disruptively, the investment in research and development has to be way beyond what we are doing currently. However, we also see that with focus on some of the areas aligned with the sustainable development goals, and with the priorities also in India, now the investments are selectively being picked up in the areas where we need to do research, where contrary to where we can do the research. So that's an important change in the approach and the necessity-based R&D. But then R&D impact is also comes over time. So we need to invest early on so that we have that leadership in these technologies. Secondly, in terms of CCUS and CDR, these become inevitable to get rid of the process emissions where we cannot really get rid of this carbon dioxide by just cleaning up the energy or heat requirements or electricity. So there, the research that is happening around the world is accelerating the deployment as well as reducing the costs for these deployment. For instance, direct air capture used to be close to like $2,000 per ton some 10-12 years ago, but massive investments and then the courage of the innovators with the support of the funding agencies to accelerate the TRL from TRL 2-3 in the labs to TRL 6-7 in the field, and now commercial deployments of these technologies. It's very important to understand its trajectory, where right know-how, good amount of research activities and fund support, along with good policies in place, have all enabled the ecosystem for development of these systems. As I speak right now, I'm attending the World CCUS conference. I'm a part of the committee here in Norway, and I'm seeing how in the last 5 years there is an exponential growth in the CCUS facilities around the world. And so to say, in India also, last year I presented to the Prime Minister Scientific Council, and we have written the mission note and pending approval for financial concurrence. And we are being very positive about it because somewhere since the announcement of net zero for India by 2070, if you look at different pathways to achieve that technology-wise, we cannot really do without CCUS. In fact, last year we produced a specific roadmap for the steel sector, decarbonization roadmap, which was like 14 different task forces. And turns out that towards net zero, almost 55% of the efforts will come from CCS and CDR. So definitely these technologies need to be considered. We can push them a little ahead in terms of timelines, but it's almost non-negotiable right now with these technologies. And therefore, when the world is grappling with solutions in these areas, it might be worthwhile to invest in R&D for disruptive solutions with the necessary technology scale-up support. CDR is a little farther away from CCUS, so to say, because CDR is removing from air, which is 0.04%, whereas from the emissions it's between 5 to 30% commonly. So definitely the concentration being too low, the energy intensity is very high. Unless we have massive renewables in place that can actually help do the technology, it's going to be very expensive. However, it is also another inevitable leg of the decarbonization portfolio. So all in all, technology will play a major role. The support from agencies like the different banks, the different multilateral banks, the national banks, and the other venture capital funds to scale up the technologies, supporting the innovators. India is a startup success story is now coming to the deep tech space much more than ever before. I think that ecosystem support and also not to reinvent the wheel, to learn by collaboration and partnerships will be one of the keys in kind of accelerating the new technologies to be scaled up. Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks, Dr. Vishal. So, I'll come back to you, Alex. Since you said that many companies are new, definitely they would like to grow very, very quickly. At the same time, India is not looking at not only the domestic market, they would like to sell the clean manufacturing products outside India as well. So, from the global vantage point, what are the, short and medium steps these companies must follow so that they are ahead of the global competitors? Over to you, Alex.
Yeah, thanks, Labanya. Yeah, I think focusing on efficiency is definitely a huge opportunity. So, for example, you look at Udyakta, which is one of our companies that's looking at air compressors. You've got Smart Joules working at air conditioning. I think there's huge opportunities, whether it's heating, whether it's steel decarbonization. I think the efficiency opportunity is huge for sure. I think more efficient equipment as well. So, for example, we've got a company called Taurus Robotics, which is working on more efficient motors and drives. We've got a company called, oh, sorry, am I still here? I personally invested in a company called Gaudi Drives, working on more efficient compressors for air conditioners. I think there's a lot of these opportunities. I think there's so much obsession with let's manufacture solar. Solar doesn't create any jobs. A 50 gigawatt solar manufacturing plant in China, Longji, has maybe 500 jobs, right? But there's a lot of jobs to be made, a lot of value to be created in terms of the motors, the making the battery diagnostics better. We've got a company called ETRNL making a more efficient battery cell design that effectively allows for better energy density, and it's kind of technology agnostic. We've got a company called Off Grid Energy Labs working on zinc gel. We'd love to see, that we're seriously contemplating moving to UK because there's a lack of support in India. We'd love to see companies like SBI come in and say, we're going to fund zinc gel, we're going to fund sodium ion, we're going to fund these alternate battery chemistries. So I think there's as Rajan kind of said in his latest book, I think there's a huge opportunity for kind of services-led manufacturing, for IP-led manufacturing. I think simply saying, we're just going to copy what China is doing and do solar scale manufacturing, but we're just going to do it at 50% higher costs because we're doing it at subscale. I don't think that's a recipe for success. We have to find ways to nurture and support innovation. We have to find specific technologies and specific implementations. Perfect example, this is electric vehicles, making two-wheelers that are fit for Indian roads and Indian temperatures and Indian conditions. That's a great way for Indian two-wheeler manufacturers to differentiate themselves and also serve other emerging markets, particularly in Africa and Southeast Asia. So yeah, I think we need to get over this obsession with solar manufacturing and start thinking bigger and broader about all the different potential areas to innovate.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Good to hear from a different perspective. So since you are looking at, I'm going to give you a particular picture on job creation, which is very, very critical for India. So I'll come to Mr. Pratyush, that you spoke about the kind of incentives you are closely working with the government also. You are not really afraid to lend green manufacturing projects as well, although there are risks involved. So what are the kind of risks you are encountering when you are conducting any due diligence on green manufacturing? Is it related to business model or the technology is not proven? Over to you, Pratyush. Yeah.
Actually, most of the green manufacturing projects, they involve newer technologies, and maybe they have untested business models, evolving supply chain, and higher upfront costs as compared to the conventional manufacturing. So this translates to uncertainties around scalability, cash flows, and long-term viability. So bank does have a comprehensive risk assessment model, wherein all the concerned risks are assessed and mitigations are put in place before the approval of any loan. But as far as the green manufacturing projects are concerned, some of the risks that come to my mind, first and foremost, is the technology risk. Because most of these technologies, may it be the green hydrogen, the advanced battery, offshore wind, they are still evolving. And rapid obsolescence or performance uncertainty can impair the repayment capacity of the projects. So in my view, technology risk is the most important risk because most of these technologies are new and they have limited track record and reliability regarding effectiveness. The second risk that comes to my mind for this sector is the market and policy risk. Because all these projects are heavily dependent on government policies, incentives, and market demand. So any changes in regulatory frameworks, maybe a reduction in subsidy, they could like alter the project's profitability and viability. Additionally, if there is sudden change in the market preference or demands, then also the assets can be left stranded. The third risk that comes to my mind is the supply chain risk, because all these green technologies are still evolving, the supply chains are still evolving, and all these are vulnerable to the disruptions. So the supply chain can include lack of reliable suppliers, or maybe some specialized raw materials are required. So these are broadly the risks that come to my mind as the new green manufacturing projects are concerned, apart from the physical climate risk that no sector is immune with. And last but not the least, one more concern is that bank is concerned is regarding the absence of a clear taxonomy. So in absence of a taxonomy, the greenwashing concerns are also hugely because this may lead to reputational loss of the bank, and because now banks are reporting on various forums, bank is publishing a sustainability report. So greenwashing is a major concern, and we have to be very conscious about the risk involved for that. So these are some of the risks that come to my mind regarding the green manufacturing sector.
Thanks, Pratyush. Akshay, I mean, you spoke about private equity are really not afraid to invest in technologies which are, I mean, where the business model is proven, but many times private equity players, they are afraid of taking any risk actually, particularly technology risk. So beyond technology risk, what are the other risks you think is critical for private equity investors? You don't want to be engaged, be associated, not comfortable in providing equity or debt capital to the sector.
Yeah, Lavanya. So, Mr. Pratyush, from a banker's perspective, very eloquently captured a lot of these risks, which do overlap with what private equity investors also look for. But beyond technology, I think one of the largest risks we look for is offtake risk, which is to what extent there will be a demand for the product in terms of quantity and at what price. And that risk remains because in some cases, some of the subsectors are still evolving. Whether it is electric vehicle for passenger segments, not the electric vehicle two-wheelers, or if it is, say, segments like electronic waste recycling. Now, within the pricing risk, an element is what is the supply chain and input risk, because that also determines the pricing risk. And we pay a lot of attention to what is the cost of raw materials that are coming in, variability, and the ability of a manufacturer to pass on those higher, if at all, costs to the customers. So this is some of the elements which we focus on. Other element is market share, but that is a very secondary level risk. Primary remains offtake. We are also focusing on an element on capital intensity. What we mean is that some solutions require upfront significant capital expenditure by a customer, and because of that, a manufacturer kind of fails in finding amenable customers. So this is an element where instead of providing a manufactured product for sale, can that product be provided as a service? So that business model, whether it is energy as a service, cooling as a service, steam, lighting, EVs, EV charging, or even grid charging through battery as a service, that is another business model where we are assessing risk and we are open and quite keen to participate. I would like to highlight one thing on supply chain risk because it is very commonly raised in terms of raw material procurement. What we have seen is if there are multiple companies supplying a particular input raw material, even if those multiple companies are based within the same country, then in spite of restrictions from, say, that single country government, manufacturers here in India have been able to successfully bypass and make alternate arrangements when there are multiple suppliers from the same country. And therefore, supply chain risk is important, but is secondary compared to other risks of quantum and pricing. So those are a broad set of risks which we are seeing.
Thanks. Good to know that you are more comfortable in service-based business model instead of taking technology risk. You are not comfortable with that. Bharti, I mean, since you are also in the business of investment banking, so what kind of capital demanded by green manufacturing companies? We heard from Akshay, I mean, private equity is available, VC funds are available. Mr. Pratyush shared that commercial banks are also willing to provide capital as well. So from the demand side perspective, what are the capital they are looking for? At the same time, what are the appetite of investors as well?
From demand side, they are looking for as much capital as they can get. I mean, there is, there is no end to that. But what they are looking for, I think, so along with the demand, we have to also think about what they can get. Right? So if it's a, let's say, it's a technology. So green technology companies, for example, CCUS, hydrogen, fuel cells, or whatever. So today, if a company like that wants to raise capital, what are the options? One is these government grants, 40, 50 lakhs, 1 crore. That number keeps increasing. It's still very low, but today, if you get an incubator support, you could get grants because that time no one will fund you, right, until your product is made. Or some prototype level 1, TRL level 2, 3, whatever that is. Until that is made, there is no funding available. So now we have some grants. So that is one. Then as they grow, they are today, now again the system is getting better. We have few deep tech funds who would fund you up to an extent of $1 million or so. But as you grow, and 1 million will not even get you a pilot plant, right? If you're a cell manufacturing company, even to set up a pilot plant, which will make cells that you can give it, those cells can be given to a two-wheeler company and they can try. Even that plant would cost you at least 2.5 million. So that's where the challenge is. So 1 million will come, and again another maybe 20 million will come. But in between this 3 million, 4 million, we have few VC providers who do it, and maybe if you're lucky, you would get it, but that's not the norm. So that is one. And on the debt, I feel what I have seen is that leasing is taking off. So if you see today, like Akshay mentioned, cooling as a service. If I, as an apartment, if we want to set up a solar rooftop, we can get it without having to invest the capex. So what that is doing to the manufacturers is that it is increasing the market for their products, right? Like today, if you are making HVAC systems or your solar systems or battery, because batteries again, you could sell the battery as a service. So what it is doing is it is increasing the demand for those products, right? But those companies also will want a collateral-free loan, or if not collateral-free loan, at least loan to collateral percentage as low as possible. So that's what they want, and maybe that is available to some extent. Banks are getting better. I mean, they have green products, and some of them have green mandates, but still time to get the application sanctioned will be like more than 3-4 months. And some industries that are taking off. For example, now you see so many entrepreneurs want to start CBG plant. Compress. I saw some question in the chat as well on that. We get driven by the government policies. A lot of them want to start that CBG plant, but they have to own the land. They need to have so many things. So to do that, they will have to put in a lot of capital. So that, I think that it's not, so I don't think demand side that people have any choice. They get, supply side is fairly limited. And supply, is available for very innovative companies or very large companies or established companies that have stable, predictable cash flows. Otherwise, I think if you are lucky, then there are bankers who are willing to do this, but those are not the norms. That's not the norm.
Okay, when you are saying that if you are lucky, so I'll remember that I'll ask Mr. Pratyush another day, and maybe Akshay as well. I'll come to you, Hisham. The last question, that when I'm talking about Dr. Vishal talk about supply chain decarbonization, but at the same time there are risks involved, as well as there are no incentives for large corporations also. So what are the kind of incentives required? And you also spoken about green industrial policies. A component of industrial policy is to incentivize corporations to invest in technologies. Many technology will not be successful. Okay, that's the reason you have focused on, okay, let's provide capital for R&D. And India, a couple of months declared that they are creating a 1 lakh crore R&D fund as well. So in your mind, what are the kind of incentives required? Over to you, Hisham. Yeah.
So thanks. So I'm going to split my answer into two. One is what I think are suggestions for government intervention, and the second is the non-governmental part. On the government side, one incentive that I think would be particularly helpful is the PLI scheme has been successful in some sectors. There's clear examples of that. But how do we make sure that there is the right incentive for a greener manufacturing part of it? And it's a question of a basis point difference that you add as the incentive for the greener version of whatever that sector is. And the second is to create research-linked incentives, because while there is the 1 lakh crore fund that's there, it's actually not, the government is not putting in 1 lakh crore. It's a fund where you want more money to be put in. How do you make sure that there is an incentive for companies to put that in? And maybe it's a tax break or whatever. So that's one. The second is on the demand side. What is it that the government can do to send the right signals? And the example that I'll give is on efficiency standards in the automotive industry, your BS1, BS2, BS6, etc. Every time a new standard comes in, I hope there are no auto sector leaders here, but the auto sector will go up in arms saying that this new standard, the whole industry is going to collapse, the market's going to shut down, etc. But they find a way of innovating, and they find a way of delivering to the new standards profitably. Where was the last time you saw this kind of standards outside of the auto sector, and why can't it be there everywhere else? Instead of just an efficiency rating that you get on an air conditioner or a fridge, imagine if you had efficiency standards. Imagine if the government then said, we are going to start green procurement. We're going to start procurement of green steel as a mandate to government. Those are things which will send demand signals to industry. The third is getting a more real price on carbon and having a carbon market that works, that is well designed, which the government has announced. I think that would help immensely in making the business case for green manufacturing. So it's those three components. I think on the finance side, I have a slightly harder set of messages. I think one part of it is at every international forum, India can and should talk about the climate justice question and how, the polluting world must be funding the $1 trillion or $2 trillion, etc., that is required. We should make that noise. We should make that noise consistently and vociferously, but that money ain't going to come. The money is going to be raised from domestic sources. So let's start figuring out where those domestic investors are and what they are doing to finance this. Here's a challenge. Tomorrow, if you were, as part of this series, organizing an event, a panel like this, and you wanted to get 5 or 4 or 3 of India's, the CEOs of India's leading investment companies, not the green finance companies, the mainstream investor companies who are credible on sustainability, hand on heart, you would struggle. We don't have that leadership amongst Indian investors, and we need that leadership now, because today you're taking an investment decision for a steel plant, and you're saying, if I do traditional blast furnace, this is the cost. If I do, electric arc furnace, this is the cost. It's so much more. But the way to calculate it is also that in 5 years' time, the blast furnace isn't going to be able to sell a gram of steel into Europe in 10 years' time, it's going to be emissions and cost uncompetitive in India. Then rework your spreadsheets. And then you will realize how you need to make that case. You just don't have that leadership yet from the Indian investor community. The third pitch I'll just make is on medium and small enterprises. There are a number of government schemes that are there. The uptake for those schemes are desperately low. And we have to find what is the underlying problem for that prevents that uptake and see everything that we can do. And there's a role for the government, but there's also a role for corporates to try and industry bodies to try and help MSMEs access the finance and the technology advisory that these schemes offer.
Thanks, Hisham. So, I mean, we have already reached 5 p.m., but we'll take a couple of questions from the participants. Okay, the first question I will ask Akshay. So, do we think that the private equity can support indigenization of upstream value chain activities? Do we think that the private equity in India are willing to take that kind of risk?
It is being done as we speak. As long as there is a demand from the end customer, as Hisham mentioned, whether through regulation or through economics, the entire value chain, upstream and downstream, comes together. And we are seeing that across not just the solar cell manufacturing and solar module, but batteries as well.
Okay, thanks, Akshay. Another question for Pratyush, that Pratyush, you spoke about blended financing. Okay, the question is related to, is it limited to clean energy sector? You are seeing that, okay, blended financing can be deployed in other sectors. Theoretically, it can be deployed, but what exactly? I have several questions on blended financing. I'm not asking those questions right now.
It is not limited to RE sector only. Like we are extended to other mitigation projects, maybe EV, electric transportation, and adaptation projects also, like sustainable irrigation and water management irrigation. That also we have lines with MDB, and we are supporting by way of blended finance to other sectors other than RE.
Okay, thank you. Bharati, we have a question. I mean, large corporations, particularly listed companies, they are bound to disclose through BRSR their sustainability or climate change. But what about MSMEs? Because they don't have the right data, they have to spend money in collecting data and disclosing. So particularly for investors who would be interested in putting money MSMEs, but they don't know actually what kind of emission of these MSMEs.
So MSMEs that supply to large companies who have to report emissions, they have to report right now. So these are people who have to report because their customers are asking for them. So they will have to report. Other than that, I think today, if you install a solar, why do MSMEs install a solar? There is a big, penetration is increasing there, right? Because there is given report your emissions and your interest rates will be lower, or report your emissions and you will be able to supply to A, B, and C. And we will see more and more. And currently, we don't have any uniform standard also. And for MSMEs, then it has to be something very simple, something that can be done. Although these reporting software companies are trying to do that, but currently there is no compulsion for them to report, etc. Unless either there has to be incentive or there has to be their customer asking for it. So I guess that's where the problem is.
Okay, thanks, Bharati. Mr. Pratyush, another question related to the question is that credit expansion in the manufacturing and industrial sector from the banking sector is not growing that much. So is it true, or you are saying no, it's not true that credit? I mean, I understand that you would like to see good quality of good credit quality assets. I mean, you cannot be so much imprudential in your lending decisions.
I'm not the right person to answer this because my role is limited to climate finance and ESG. So, and I'm not tracking the data also. So I'm very sorry, I'll not be able to answer anything.
No problem, I can understand. Akshay, do you think that how private equity fund or let's say VC debt fund, or we are noticing that alternative investment debt fund also, they are bridging some of the debt financing gaps where commercial banks are not compatible. What do you think about this?
This is a very important part, and this is an interim solution till such time the banks and NBFCs get comfortable in lending. And this we have seen in most of the subsectors within green businesses. So both the debt, whether venture debt or private credit, and both private equity, whether venture capital or private equity, they came in before the mainstream banks and NBFCs were able to lend to it.
Okay, okay. There is a Hisham, you spoke about bringing large-scale investor, and at the same time, we are not noticing that they are reacting to climate change, because Indian financial market, many times I believe that it's not reacting to climate change at all. And large-scale investors, they are saying, okay, stock market is indifferent. Why should I take a bet? Okay, my question is that to what extent the low risk appetite institutional investors like pension fund and insurance companies, are they willing to, or what are the changes required at the system level?
So happy to respond to that, but can I just come back to the point on MSMEs and one challenge that's there? How come the companies, the mainstream corporates know everything there is to know about every paisa in the cost structure of an MSME when they're negotiating, but somehow don't know the emissions? Same MSME, same skeletal systems. Unfortunately, the needle of suspicion points to the fact that you're not asking the question. So I just want to kind of place that out there. Companies need to get more serious about it and stop, passing the buck onto the MSMEs saying we don't know, because they know everything about the cost part of it. On the pension funds, etc., when you pick up the annual reports of any one of the big 50 global investors, they will tell you that sustainability is really important and we're committed to spend 1 trillion, 2 trillion, 5 trillion, etc., etc., etc. When you pick up the phone and try to speak to their sustainability leads, not a single one of them sits in India. Where do they sit? They sit in Paris, they sit in London, they sit in Geneva, they sit in New York. Why? Because the regulatory pressure and the investor pressure and the consumer pressure is so much stronger in those markets. Now, we can't generate that consumer pressure overnight in India. That will come over time, but it will come. But what we can do is send regulatory signals. A well-functioning Indian carbon market will be an important part of that signal setting. Responding and seeing the pressures on your export markets, particularly into the European Union, but not only in the European Union, will send another signal. When you compare yourself with South Korean manufacturers, and I'm deliberately choosing South Korea, not China, because China is bigger, etc., and then you see how they are more cost competitive than you in some of these markets, that again sends a signal to relatively low risk funders like pension funds to up their game.
Okay, okay. There is last question for Bharati. You spoke about CBG plans. Is it investable now? Is it attractive enough for private investors today? Bharati?
So CBG is not. Can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yes, yes, yes. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So CBG, CBG is a relatively like 3-4 year old moment, if I can call it a moment. So I think there are not many plans